I believe the colonial empire has used Christianity and has used what once was probably a peaceful religion to colonize the world. It's really sad, and what you can see that has happened in India and what you can see that's happened in America actually happened here first. So the Brythonic people were the people across the whole of Britain, really were the first to take the brunt of this empire. The only way that I could describe it is like, look at what's happened in most recent history around the world. We were the sort of testing ground. Not many people know that, and it's even controversial talking about it. The ancient bards were masters of synchronicity because their poetry that they used to speak of what we do know was inspired by recognizing the patterns within the natural world, especially the weather, to then prophesize what was going to happen in the future, which to me is synchronicity. Similar to Sanskrit, it's not just about this is what this chant means. The language is specifically organized in a way that actually alters your state of consciousness. The Christian language was Latin and then it was English. That's how they got to us. Imagine if you're fighting and you have your mother, your sister, and your daughter behind you. Like, how are you going to fight? How are you going to protect your land? That's sort of what we had. And then we just had the Roman soldiers who were just doing what they were told. People all over the world telling me that the exact same thing happened to their culture, from the Native American tribes to across Africa, Australia, India.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Illuminating Dialogues number 34. We have really the pleasure of talking to Stella Marie today. How are you, Stella, and where are you coming from in the world?
Hey, Jhoty, I am coming from South Wales. My name is Stella Marie Shepherd, but online I'm known as Stella Marie. Not many people know of my last name. Yeah, and I'm coming from the south of Wales, which is a little country in Britain that not many people have heard of as much as, say, Scotland, Ireland, and England. And I'm doing really well, thank you. Really grateful to be having the conversations about things that I love talking about.
Awesome. And I'm really, actually, I was at Wales for the first time this year, and it's so beautiful. It just has like rolling pastures and has that kind of calm feeling to it. And I've just been, as we were talking about, watching some of your content. I was Googling Celtic spirituality, how I myself could connect to the land. Um, and yeah, like your content really resonated with me. So I'm really grateful to have you on and hopefully share some of that wisdom and work that you've done, that you go through with the viewers. But before we do so, I'd love to give you a short introduction and bio for those people who are not familiar with Stella. So Stella Marie from Starlit Stories helps unravel the ancient Indigenous history of ancient Wales and Britain, reconnecting us to our roots through decolonising history, spiritual mythos and sacred sites from native Britain, and really rediscovering wild and Indigenous wisdom of the land. Stella shares with her 40,000 plus Instagram subscribers really how to heal our ancestral lineage and navigate the notion of New Age and Celtic spirituality from a grounded and holistic lens. So I really appreciate the work that Stella's doing. I'd love to delve into an illuminating dialogue on Celtic spirituality versus, ancient Britain, looking into ley lines, perhaps also touching on the ancient practices here, like the Bards, the Druids, was Awen, perhaps some work on decolonization. I love juicy topics to flow into, but before we begin, this podcast is called Illuminating Dialogues. It's really a space for us both to journey together, maybe to a place we haven't gone before, and illuminate to ourselves, the speakers, and hopefully the listeners as well. So with that being said, my first question to you, Stella, is what lights you up?
What lights me up? A blend of creativity and study. So this is a question I actually have asked myself in my journal for years,
Mm,
but it's phrased with like what sets your heart and soul on fire. And throughout the years, depending on the season I'm in, I will write down something different. And it's always got something to do with like my creative expression and learning from other people, having interesting conversations with people like we are right now, learning about different cultures, learning about different philosophies, but there's always a blend with like creative practice, which is why I came to create like YouTube videos and create a podcast and create content. Because it's a creative way for me to like share what I learn. And really within that, the topics throughout time have changed, but they're always centered around compassion for nature
mm,
and compassion for like ourselves. Like that's at the center of my studies.
amazing. And I really feel that when I engage with your content, because it's very just like, yeah, like nature and compassion. Like you can just breathe almost. And I feel like it's very authentic in a way as well. And a lot of information out there, especially now in the internet, it's quite hard to come across authenticity. So I think that really resonated with me. Um, yeah, so I love that you shared that. And this YouTube channel really began with me also exploring the land of my native origin, Punjab, and trying to understand the land there and also my grandparents' story. Them growing up there and coming over here, and how was that life? And that led me to my own exploration. So I'd love for you to just start with sharing with the viewers kind of your exploration into beginning really into the spiritual world, what that meant for you,
Mm,
and also how did that then touch into Indigenous wisdom and learning about
mm,
your own culture in Wales?
mm. Yeah, so I was introduced to spirituality through my mother, actually. She wasn't the most spiritual person, and she passed away actually in 2020, so when I was 25.
Mm,
I don't share or talk much about like my grief or my family history online because I'm sort of now moving into myself being like the personal brand, so I do want to start talking more about my personal life and grief because that's got a lot to do with it. But she introduced me to psychedelic mushrooms from these lands to actually help me with depression and mental health. And she didn't know that my psychedelic experience would actually give me like such a profound sense of peace and connection to nature that I just became a hippie. And yeah, that was yeah, in my late teens, and that got me looking into like sort of, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I found meditation. I started really resonating with Hindu mythology, especially the artwork and the stories that
mm,
depict the conscious exploration. I was really interested in the creativity of that, the music, the chanting, the mantra, how just sort of full, the Hindu culture is in terms of spirituality. I really got into Buddhism. I was the sort of typical New Age hippie that had just done mushrooms, really, but it was the connection to nature in terms of like being aware that I am actually a part of nature that for
mm,
me really made me feel like really safe for like the first time in life. So that was my introduction when I was a late teen into spirituality. And because it was quite an explosive awakening, it was crazy, because I went from being quite an atheist into oh my God, I'm connected to everything. I care about nature. What have I done? Who have I been before? Who am I?
mm,
Um, but then Hinduism and Buddhism just kept reminding me, just breathe. Just breathe. So, as wild and as overwhelming the start of my spiritual journey was, I'm really grateful for those cultures that have existed, to just remind us to sit down and breathe. And then years later, I went to university in Herefordshire and I studied contemporary design and craft. You complimented my earrings, which
they're
is where I made
amazing.
them.
Mm,
Yeah, that's where I made them. And I was looking into mandalas. I was really interested in mandalas in architecture. because we had a cathedral in Hereford, and in the cathedral windows you have
Mm.
the really big like mandalas. I was like, okay, like why are these patterns everywhere? Is there a deeper spiritual meaning? And then in the library in university, I was looking at the architectural section and the artifact section, and I found a book on Celtic artifacts.
Wow.
And it was the first time that I'd ever really paid attention to what the people of these lands were portraying artistically. And they really reminded me of my psychedelic experience. And then I sort of put two and two together. Well, these mushrooms are from here. They cover everywhere from Ireland to Scotland to Wales. And these people were probably eating them and they were influenced by the medicine of the land. And that then put me into this place now where I'm studying and teaching and sharing about spirituality from these lands. It was through, yeah, my craft degree where I found the artwork and I was like, that looks really funky. Like pixie looking characters with swirls all around them. I was like, where does that come from? And yeah, since then, it's just been a real deep dive into the hidden mysteries from our land. Like, why did it take me so long to find spirituality from here? Why do so many people move away from these lands? I'm still really looking forward to travel to India and Mexico and a lot of other places, but a lot of people leave here because they don't
Mm.
think we have anything, which isn't the case.
And I'd love to explore that with you because also part of my journey is trying to understand in Scotland yeah, what wisdom lies here. And I love that you shared that June 2020, you were listening to Eckhart Tolle, had kind of quite of a similar experience, very much engineer, scientist, kind of rational approach. And then listening to Power of Now, and I didn't understand any of the Indian mythology. My way in was like through the Greeks. And then through that, yeah, like sacred geometry, it's very interesting how all of these
Mm.
cultures had that sacred geometry, which is the underlying pattern of the universe. And yeah, it's just so interesting. And I know you mentioned the topic of awakening, and to my knowledge, there's different levels of awakening. But for from your understanding or perspective, what does it mean in terms of the ancient British language or the perspective of ancient Britain? What did awakening mean to that culture?
Yeah, so it's not really a straightforward answer. Like if we look to ancient Britain, so during Rome and the Roman period and pre-Rome, um, there were many different tribes upon these lands, and they would have had very similar ways of living in terms of the type of houses that they lived in, their family structures, their tribal structures, but their spiritual practices would have been very particular to the natural world around them. So, up in North Wales and up in the Highlands in Scotland, a lot of their like mythology and folklore and spirituality is about that landscape. Whereas in the more
Mm.
like watery, like Cardiff in South Wales, where I am, it was very marshy. Their spirituality was a little bit different, and we don't know a lot about it. And when it comes to awakening, from my research and what I understand, is how to put it into words so that the myths that we have left over were written by people called bards, and the bards existed from the Iron Age period up until the medieval period.
Mm.
And during the Iron Age period, they didn't have any written form of communication or documentation. So the bard's role was to keep all of the history and the spiritual mythos of the people in their minds. And they would be initiated into their roles through like 20 plus years of yeah, schooling and education. People would travel from around Europe to Britain to learn the
Wow.
ways of the Bard and the Druids. And most people have heard of Druids, but it's mainly the Bards that were the ones that were keeping this information, the spiritual wisdom and mythos. And in the Iron Age period, because they weren't writing anything down, their oral language and their spoken word was the most important part of their spiritual pursuit and skill
Mm,
set. So what's really interesting is it wasn't just what they knew, it was how they shared it through words. So similar to Sanskrit, it's not just about this is what this chant means. The language is specifically organized in a way that actually alters your state of consciousness.
mm,
And I and many other people believe that this is what the ancient Brythonic language was. So language was like a part of their spirituality. And this leads back to your question about awakening, because during the medieval period, where the church had come and was trying to influence our way of being, the bards of the Brythonic period basically were able to write it down because they learned methods of writing. And they wrote down stories and myths that we don't know. We can't, like, I can't tell you that these specific myths are ancient,
mm.
but they likely are. You know, they likely were the written down stories are likely a lot older than when they were written down. So one of these stories in Wales, a Welsh myth, talks about awakening. And I can only say and talk about this story and this area of Wales. It's not like I can say this was what all of ancient Britain believed
Mm-hmm.
in. But yeah, it's a story about awakening through a liquid potion called Awen. And Awen is the divine inspiration. It's an ancient Welsh word. It dates back to it dates back to the Iron Age periods. It's got roots in the Indo-European languages, which is where Sanskrit and the Indian languages also come from. Like the modern Welsh language and the ancient, the modern um, Sanskrit language and
Ah,
Punjabi language actually come from the same Indo-European root, which is really interesting.
okay.
So yeah, in Wales now we have this word called Awen, which is this divine inspiration. And in the mythology that we have left, it is said that if you come into contact with that divine inspiration, this potion, you can go from being a very normal person to knowing all of the wisdom of the universe. So
Wow.
yeah, the Awen is sort of a route to that. There's also the salmon fish that's a very common symbol in our mythology that talks about like when you come into contact with the salmon fish,
Mhm.
the salmon is the being of all knowing and all wisdom, can tell prophecy, knows the future, knows the past, knows everything about the cosmos. Um, yeah, just little things like that, really. We can look back at the mythology to see perhaps what the people of that time period may have believed and understood about awakening. And then, then there's like the mushrooms I spoke to you about earlier. My experience of awakening happened through them. So it just makes sense to me that that's would have influenced the people of the past's, experience as well. I know I just said a lot, but it all sort of comes together and you can pick at any bit you want.
So interesting. I think my mind goes to so many different areas, but Awen, first thing that comes up to me is like we have this word called amrit, which is known as nectar. So there's like this amrit, which is like a physical like liquid that we you take during initiation, but there's also in the mystical understanding the amrit that actually happens inside that when your consciousness effectively opens to a certain level, that also is an internal process. So just what comes intuitively is also they both begin with an A and they have kind of like similarities there. So
Mm.
that's kind of interesting too. So I also had a question that came to mind is the language of ancient Brittonic, I think you called it that.
Yeah.
Is that similar to the English we know today, or was that completely different?
No, it's Welsh, Cornish. Welsh and Cornish can be traced back to the Old Brythonic language, but the modern English language is a separate thing. The modern English language, I believe, is like a mixture of other European languages as well as Latin influence. I'm not too like knowledgeable about the language and etymology as much as I'd like to be, but I know that the Brythonic language can sort of be separated, um, Cornwall and Wales, and then you've
Mm-hmm.
got England, like on the other side, which have different roots.
Yeah, so interesting. Because for me, I do think, like you were saying about mantras, I know that in the ancient Vedic traditions, they had oral tradition as well, but it wasn't until a certain age that people started to record the mantras. And the tradition I come from, in the Sikh tradition, um, they have the words, the mantras, but when you say them, they invocate different um, flavorings almost. So you have like peace, shant, but then you have like a brave spirit. So the actual language affects your emotion. Is that similar to how the ancient bards uh, served the society in that regard?
It's unknown how the ancient bards did because they didn't write anything down,
Ah,
and they weren't allowed to write down their actual history. So the stories that we've got have a Christian overtone, but
aha,
they're still talking about like magical potions that turn you into shape-shifting animals and sorcerers. And magical women that live in other worlds. So it's almost as if the bards of the medieval period, when writing it down, were really disguising our ancient stories
aha,
in Christian mythos. Um, so yeah, it's really hard to it's really hard to really look back that far. But what we know today, so this bardic tradition still survives today, but it has it's very different how it used to be. And today we have something called the National Eisteddfod,
okay.
which is a yearly celebration, which is the celebration of Wales and Welsh culture. And the bards today, all they don't necessarily like. So you've got bards in Druidism. I'm talking about something different that's quite formal, that's very formal to Wales. They celebrate Welsh language and poetry today. And although they don't have like different associations with, like, say, peace comes with this sort of syllable or way of or tone, um, the point in the bard is to project out a message and tell a story or sing a song or share poetry to wow the audience, which I guess you could say is like, well, that's all performance. But with the modern bardic tradition, it's all about really how you share and pronounce every single word, how you move your body, and how you influence the audience, which for me is how you influence the state of consciousness in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And because this comes back from a very ancient tradition where they did believe in magic, they did believe in prophecy. What I call the ancient bards were masters of synchronicity
Mm-hmm.
because their poetry that they used to speak of what we do know was inspired by recognizing the patterns within the natural world, especially the weather, to then prophesize what was going to happen in the future, which to me is synchronicity. And one thing that's important to note, say about the bards, just as we're talking about this, is that their main role was to serve the chieftain or the tribal leader. So as the bards survived because they had such a powerful skill set that they could tell the future. They remembered everything. And it was believed in that time that if you were able to speak someone's name out loud, they lived until, well, forever while you sang that song. So this is how the bards survived and everyone else didn't, because the priests that came over, they were didn't like our pagan ways, but they were like, these bards actually have something we might need. And then that's how they survived. So
Ah,
yeah, this is something that I've recently been really realizing. Like, so I was like, why did they survive? Like, what was the purpose? But then it's like, well, their skills were sort of unlike anything these people had seen before.
That's so interesting. Because as you were talking about the synchronicity and things like that, going back to your earrings, it's like, so like the language, in the same way that the like the mandalas are mathematically structured, the language is structured as such. And so
Mhm.
by using that language, or by communing with that language, they're effectively um, connected to the land and, yeah, the universe. And so it just shows that the society valued that kind of intuition, because they were advising the chief, right? But nowadays, if you
Mm.
look at the people advising society, they're not exactly have that level of intuition, which is quite interesting. And what we would say in our cultures, they had certain riddhis or siddhis, so certain spiritual powers or um, insights that would then, um, it's like so we'd have this thing called Miri Piri. So Miri is like the king, comes from the Persian word Amir, and Piri is like, comes from the Arabic word Bir, which is like wise man. So it's like you both have the wise man and the king, and I think all indigenous cultures have this.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was really interesting parallel. Um, I'm just so interested about, like, when the Romans did come or the Christians did come, slightly confused between the two. If they
Okay.
came together or if they affected the pagan society or the original, say original, but the society that was there before.
Mm.
Um, what kind of happened there, and how did that begin to affect the society? Because that kind of tells a tale about how it shifted to kind of today's society as well.
Yeah, so there's so much history,
Mm.
and I wish I could share what I've got in writing and my studies and my research, but to sort of like break it down and simplify it, when Rome first came here, when people from Italy first came here, they were pagan, and they believed in lots of different pagan gods and goddesses. And they came over here and they were like, "Oh, you've got this goddess for a river. No, not as cool as ours," sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'd come and then they placed sort of their goddess here. One example of a blend is in Bath. In Bath in England, they've
Mm.
got the Roman baths there. They've got,
Ah.
I haven't been before, but they've got a shrine there for a goddess called Sulis Minerva. I believe it's Minerva. So Sulis was an ancient Celtic goddess of the land, and Minerva was the Roman goddess. So in this instance, they'd blended the Roman goddess with the Celtic goddess because the Romans actually honored and probably understood the goddess of the land there. In most parts of Britain, you will just find the Roman name and you won't find any trace of Celtic paganism. And then after that, so I know more about that period, but then after that, um, that's when Rome became Christian. And then you've got like Roman Catholicism, Roman Christianity, and all of that. Where Britain comes into the picture there, it's very different looking at sort of East England and how it influenced them to how it influenced Wales. So in Wales, we had like the Welsh land now. Um, we had it was very hard for them to completely deter us away from our pagan beliefs because we had such a strong connection to the land because of a lot of the mountains here, because it was like actually very hard
Mm.
for invaders to get to us in comparison to England and the east of England because it's so flat there. So when Christianity came here, people don't really like the term, but I use it to explain it. You've got like Celtic Christianity. Celtic Christianity is very like nature influenced.
Mm.
You'll get a lot of like yew trees, still preserved, like over 1,000 years old yew trees, like still preserved, whereas in other parts of England, they would have been like destroyed, because they were like a place of worship. So I hope that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. And I think people watching, especially if they're coming from different backgrounds, they may have heard pagan for the first time, and they're probably wondering, um, obviously there's a oneness, but then
Yeah.
what is God's, like, what is gods and goddesses, and how how does that affect if one culture superimposes their gods and goddesses on another? Because my understanding from the East is that these are like sub personalities almost of ourselves and also in nature. So they're like a reflection of certain metaphysical almost traits that occur in uh, in nature. So could you give us some insight how that worked in native Britain?
Yeah, so what I'm actually interested in right now in this moment is because when I've looked at Hindu mythology, I've been interested in looking at it as like the story of, in essence, the human soul in relationship to the cosmic soul, like the cosmic
Yeah.
oneness and how we are parts of the one. But I'm also interested as to whether there are like actual nature spirits because I don't know anything about that over there, because that's where I sort of
Mm.
separate those two out. I know that in Japan, for example, they've got like spirit houses, those stone houses where they believe that spirits like live in that tree, so they'll build a house for it. But then they also have like mythological understandings of like God and consciousness. So like, do you know much about like
Mm.
that? Do they have any like nature spirits or anything like that?
That's so interesting because during the colonial period, a lot of things got reformed. So we recently did a podcast on that, and a lot of things did get reformed in terms of the society. So coming from the Sikh background, I know that the way the gurus did create the structures and the gurdwaras or the temples is it was in and around nature. So it's very connected to the land. So the music and the kirtan that we have, like the Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib, is around the pool of water, and hopefully we'll talk about water too. And that was around nature at the time. But I know that then the British colonial period, they had built like a watchtower to obviously remind people of the presence there, and a lot of the structures were changed at that time. And I know
Mm.
Japan didn't have that influence, so I know that they did preserve some of the aspects. So for me, it's very difficult to understand. I'm sure people would be much more educated and have this knowledge, but um, yeah, I don't. I know that there's certain entities like gods and goddesses that do represent primordial metaphysical traits. But yeah,
Mm.
I'm not sure about yeah the same as in Japan. That'd be interesting to look into.
Yeah, I always like point to Japan to talk about nature spirits because
Mm.
they create homes for them, and I'm sure they do in other cultures. But it's sort of it's easy for my human mind to compartmentalize. Oh, okay, they believe that this spirit of the land is there. And then when you look at the Celtic beliefs, well, not really the Celtic beliefs, but the mythology of spirits on these lands, they're sort of like an interweaving of what was a spirit of nature and what was a god or a goddess.
Mm.
So like Sulis was this Sulis who was the goddess. We believe her to be based on etymology, the goddess of water, healing, but healing of the eyes especially. There are tablets there where people have written curses on there, so they would give curses to this water spirit. And I personally believe that the spirits of the land and consciousness like traverses through the water ways of the earth. And I personally wouldn't. I've had some crazy experiences with spirits of the land, but I wouldn't personally call them gods or goddesses. But I do believe that our ancestors would have
Hmm.
called them gods and goddesses because they didn't. That's just how they perceived the world. And yeah, like that's sort of how I see it. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose like I suppose like having another culture like come in and put their gods and goddesses in the place of that, like could also disrupt the natural connection to the land in a way, which is quite interesting. But
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So we've got like fairies, like the
Mm.
fairy faith is one of the most ancient beliefs here.
Hmm.
Yeah, which like fairy is sort of like a broad word that we sort of in the West use to describe everything from like an otherworld experience, an experience where you're like out of time, to
Ah,
experiencing a spirit in nature. Like fairy sort of describes all of these things, which I think in the past they would have used like god or goddess to describe that.
that's so interesting. Yeah, because I think yeah, now my head's clicking is like parallels between our background when we say like the astral world. So then you'll have like different entities in the astral world, but they don't obviously have the physical energy form of a human being, which is dense. They would have
Mm.
like a different energy form, which is less dense, but you'd have to be sensitive to be in touch with such a being, which
Mm.
is quite interesting. So, um, just going back to like Christianity, so I'm wondering like how did the formal structure of Christianity being a religion um, that obviously got changed by the Romans. How did that start affecting the societal structures in ancient Britain?
Yeah, so I can speak mainly for the societal structures in Wales. So in the land of Wales now, at this time, Wales and England didn't exist as these sort of separate
Ah,
entities. But the so yeah, in Wales, we had up until like the mid 1800s, we had like non-conformist Christians is what they were called and what we're taught about them in history. And they're like a non-conformist is basically just someone who didn't have the strict this strict, I believe, like Anglo Christianity structure.
mm,
And yeah, this is the sort of history that I don't know as much about as I not necessarily would like, but feel like I need to know to answer questions like this. But it was through a lot of force. All over Britain, it was really through a lot of force. But I know that in Wales, yeah, it wasn't easy to turn us into non-conformists, into very strict Christians or Catholics because of our similar to Scotland really, like our cultures and communities were so strong and so put together in comparison to England because England had actually gone through so much more than we had. We were quite strong and sturdy. And I think yeah, like looking at the whole of Britain. So I talk a lot about the Celtic cultures. So
mm.
like Wales, Ireland, and Scotland and Cornwall. But really, England, who don't have as much of an ancient culture today, say, as we do, they really took the brunt of everything. And it really is a sad history when looking at what happened across these lands. Um, because yeah, as much as Christianity is like a very like this the commandments are really peaceful and we should all follow them, like the way that I believe the colonial empire has used Christianity and has used, this what once was probably a peaceful religion to colonize the world. It's really sad. And what you can see that has happened in India and what you can see that's happened in America actually happened here first. So
Ah,
the Brythonic people, the Brythonic people were the people across the whole of Britain, really were the first to take the brunt of this empire. And yeah, I guess the only way that I could describe it is like look at what's happened in most recent history around the world. That say we were the sort of testing ground for that actually, which is like not many people know that, and it's even controversial talking about it.
Yeah, it's like I think I've heard you speak about that once, and to me, it kind of blew my mind because I never actually saw Britain as being indigenous because I've always seen Britain as Great Britain, right? Like, and then you were talking about ancient Britain. I was like, oh yes, there must have been an ancient Britain, right? And yeah, so obviously Scotland, there was a wall. There were some um, guys beyond that wall. That's why the Romans had to keep them out. But it was quite interesting going there, because you really feel that energy, that ancient energy in the Highlands of Scotland. Um, and I wonder if you can give us a bit of insight into what that force looks like, for example, in England. So, um, is it like Romans coming in and them changing uh, the um, the pagan religion there, or was it much more forceful? Was it like kind of looting and pillaging and things as well?
Yeah, a lot of force, a lot of looting and pillaging. So, I guess one difference between the Roman people in battle and the Brythonic or
Mm-hmm.
Celtic people in battle is that the Celtic people, it is said to have had women fighting among the men.
Ah,
So the elder women would look after the children. The younger, more fit women would fight with the men. Rome just had Roman soldiers who were men. So I guess what it looked like was, I can't remember who said this. I think it was in a podcast I was on last year. Someone who interviewed me described it like this. He said, imagine if you're fighting and you have your mother, your sister, and your daughter behind you. Like, how are you going to fight? How are you going to protect your land? That's sort of what we had. And then we just had the Roman soldiers who were just doing what they were told. Essentially, they had their belief system, but when I look at it, that's what I look at. I look at like a mixture of men and women who had more respect for each other as
mm,
men and women fighting an army that was just doing what they were told, really.
wow.
And yeah, so that's Rome, but then you've also got like the Anglo-Saxons from Germany, then the Vikings came in at some point. So, and they were like like people were here at the same time, and like some of the Vikings made friends with the Welsh because they were like, actually, we're pretty similar. Um, there's so much history around it. But yeah, that idea of the men and the women fighting together really got me to understand that culture a little bit more.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's also like the divine feminine, right? Because they can actually go to war almost, and they can actually protect. We have a similar concept in our culture where both men and women are armed, essentially at the
Right.
equal status. You know, they would both tie turbans with as crowns, like cotton crowns from the earth, and we have like kurbans or daggers of giving grace. So they would both have that warrior aspect. So I find that so interesting in the indigenous
Mm.
cultures. Like there's a real resonance, and it goes like that hierarchical structure versus that more circular structure of indigenous cultures. Um,
Yeah, the masculine versus the feminine, isn't it? Like a
yeah.
lot of people do describe like the Roman culture as masculine
Mm,
and like these other cultures as feminine. I find that fascinating because I'm interested in looking at the similarities between our cultures. So this
mhm.
is like an awesome conversation for me right now. I didn't really anticipate this is where it would go, but this is exactly what I'm exploring right now.
Yeah, me too. And that's why I'm interested in like understanding the different cultures. Super cool.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to jhoty.com. All the links are in the description and connect with like-minded people where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast.
But yeah, like, and I noticed you said as well, like Celtic and like ancient Britain, and I'm wondering why the word Celtic spirituality could be kind of like misinterpreted or misused versus like the ancient Britain.
Yeah, well, it starts off with what I've learned from what I'm going to call my teacher
Mm.
of Pretani. But really, she's a lady that I've met in the past 2 years online, and I've done podcasts with her. She's called Sam McLaren, and she's from Scotland. And she taught me about the word Pretani, which is an ancient word to describe Britain, which is where the word Britain came from, like Pretani, Britanni, Britain.
Mm.
The word Celtic to describe the people here was only used in the 1700s. So, I mean, that sort of says it all. The people here would never have described themselves as Celtic up until the 1700s. And then through scholarly, like, yeah, in a scholarly way, the word Celtic was used to describe all of
Mm.
these cultures. Which when I talk to people from Ireland and Scotland, you've got the Gaelic culture anyway, which is different to Celtic. But if you go to America, people will think that the Irish are Celtic. So it's all just this like Celtic culture, you think of like Irish stuff, but it's only in the 1700s that that word was used. And then you've also got that in the Celtic period, the people spanned from mainland Europe to, Northern Ireland. So you've got hundreds and hundreds of different cultures. Celtic is not really a word to describe a people, a
Mm.
culture, or a spirituality, but it is a word to describe a time period, which I now use Iron Age as the term to describe that period.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never thought about it as Europe as well. And it's quite interesting how when a label is used or a term is used, like our collective consciousness kind of just like attaches onto that and we kind of
Mm.
lose the essence behind that, what it was before. So it's quite
Sounds like
interesting.
that happens in India, like what you were talking
Hmm.
about. Like,
Hmm.
no, I listened to a bit of a podcast
Yeah.
that you did, and a lady was talking about how when the British Empire went over to India, they separated out these different cultures and religions that didn't even exist to your people. Is that what happened? Something like that?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So they were talking about different, even within the religion itself, which was a spiritual community, they effectively, because there was 10 enlightened beings, so the gurus, they created this Khalsa, which is an army to protect the Dharma, the faith, the spiritual faith of that land. Because at the time, the Mughal or the Mongol Empire were invading. And um, the British, when the colonial empire came at that time, they noticed that these guys were armed. They had a lot of Bira, so a lot of bravery, and they wanted to use that um, and not effectively have a rebellion. So they incorporated that into their army and then they sent it towards Afghanistan. And at the same time, divide and conquer tactic. So they made very hard lines between the religions, which eventually led up to partition. Um, so, like, my grandma, she grew up with Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs in one village where they'd all, be together. But obviously, after partition, that wasn't the case. So there
Mm.
was a lot of deeper divisions what were going on. And before the partition, annexation of Punjab, they were kind of waiting behind, understanding where do they get their spiritual powers from, what mantras are they reading, and then slowly, slowly, when they came in, they could understand, okay, um, how to deconstruct their spirit almost, and then reconstruct. So, yeah, I think that's kind of a kind of overview or summary, but the guests
Mm.
explain it much better. So it's really interesting topic.
Mm.
Um, yeah. We were just talking about though um, the Christianity in
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Britain, and I suppose they had that kind of similar effect on the tribal people there as well.
Yeah. I mean, even in like the most recent history, like the 1800s and 1700s, Christianity was trying to like deconstruct and reconstruct who we were as a people. So, like the language was a huge one, and I'm pretty sure, well, I know actually, um, through a post that I did on TikTok that was about the Welsh knot, which was a punishment system
Oh.
used in the 1800s on Welsh children. So yeah, in the 1400s, 95% of people in Wales spoke Welsh and 80% of people in Cornwall spoke Cornish. Right now, today, less than 1% of people in Cornwall speak Cornish, and less than 20, well, around 20% of people in Wales speak Welsh. And all of that was through yeah, Christianization, yeah, reconstruction. So it's really sad because the language was such an important part of our
Mm.
spirituality and our spiritual culture. Um, like we're actually fighting at the moment to bring back the names of our places to be
Wow.
Welsh. We've got like our national parks have been known as their English names for ages. People come to Wales and they say I can't pronounce that. So, you know, we're really trying to bring back our sense of who we are, like which is deeply spiritual in itself, through reconnecting to the language again. And yeah, the Christian language was Latin and then it was English. So through language, really, that's how they got to us, really. They couldn't understand us, and we couldn't understand their religion, so they had to force upon us their language, to
Mm-hmm.
which we naturally, through force, ended up being the religion in which they wanted us to become, which through my TikTok post, I had hundreds of comments from people all over the world telling me that the exact same thing happened to their culture, from the Native American tribes to across Africa, Australia, um, everywhere, India.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's so interesting because I was looking into the Scottish history, and they had, I think if people spoke Gaelic in a school, they would like actually like thrash the child, so
Yep.
they wouldn't, so they actually feel ashamed. So there's also like an emotion linked to speaking your own language. So obviously your sovereignty is also going to be impacted, and that carries forward generationally in the nervous system, as we know. So I find that quite harrowing actually. Um,
Mm.
and I'm just wondering as well, I'm not sure if you know much on this, but the impact of the witch trials in Europe, did that have an effect on like the divine feminine or the feminine energy in Britain as well, like collectively, in terms of people wanting to access their intuition? Um, do you know anything regarding that?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I believe there were only four people in Wales put on a witch trial, one of which was a man, and only one of them actually got hung. I believe that's the numbers. In England, there were more, but nowhere near as many as in Europe. The reason for that was that the people in Wales and the people in Cornwall, but mainly Wales, which wasn't really a thing. So the men, and even going back, the bards would receive their herbal potions for their physical ailments, for their spiritual pursuits from the women.
Hmm.
the women, like all over, were the midwives. But the way that the Welsh worked with like health, um, as medical women was deeply entwined with magical law.
Hmm.
S- And also we were very far out. We were a lot further away. In terms of the divine feminine, yeah, I'm not sure how the witch trials exactly would have impacted us. I've looked into it because I expected, because we're a part of Europe, that we would have really faced a lot of the brunt of that, but we didn't. But yeah, like the divine feminines, a very popular topic like right now
Yeah.
in the new age world, because we're sort of realizing like we're missing something here. This sort of like patriarchal hierarchical society is missing something. Oh, we don't honor the divine feminine anymore. Where did that get cut off? Or Christianity. Because in Rome, the Romans had a divine feminine. They had divine feminines, divine masculines, they had gods and goddesses, and we did here as well. And yeah, by the time the witch trials had come along, we'd sort of already lost a lot of our like divine connection to the natural world, um, in comparison to what we would have in like the Iron Age period. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting. And I also wanted to ask you about ley lines because
Mm,
I went to Iona, which is Ireland in Scotland, and that has a very powerful energy when I went there. Loch Lomond as well. And it wasn't until I was Googling one day I came across ley lines and I realized that's a very ancient understanding behind that. So for the people who don't know, and I'm sure you have this in Wales and in England as well, um, what are ley lines and why were they important to the
mm,
ancient people?
mm. So, a ley line, from what I understand, is something highly debatable, actually.
Okay.
Different people will describe them as different things depending on which book that you read. My understanding is that it's all connected to water, and that's based on experience, and also a little bit of research. But I do believe that fundamentally it's to do with the water, the electromagnetism of the earth, and the ancient people understood this because thousands of years ago. Um, so let's go back even further. Let's go back to the Neolithic period.
Mm.
Let's go back to Stonehenge. Let's go back to prior to Stonehenge. Even thousands of years before then, we were building really big, strange stone monuments on places
Yeah.
that you can question, like, why were they building this? Like, why did they carry these, massive stones across miles of land and put it here specifically? So we can now understand that they were astronomical chambers, astronomical observatories. Some people call them burial mounds, but I don't know many people who will go through that much effort to also align it with the stars. But apparently the Egyptians did that as well, though, right? It's just the giant tomb. Um, yeah, so we can look to the Pyramid of Giza in the same way. Like all of these ancient structures, they align with the astronomy, they align with certain celestial objects, which align with parts of the earth. And I believe it is the water in the earth and where the water is held within the earth, along with the crystalline structures around the water within the earth. That's what creates this energetic sort of like thread between these very powerful points on Earth. And yeah, we don't know what the ancient people were doing, but I know that today do you know Martius de Stefano? Have
No.
you heard of his work? There's a man called Martius de Stefano he's incredible. He's from Argentina and he believes, well, he remembers all of his past lives. He believes that he's a bit like a memory cell of the earth. He believes his life's from what he says from Atlantis to Egypt, to he believes it all and understands it all and remembers it all. He has taken groups of people into the center of the Pyramid of Giza and figured out different harmonics so that when you basically when you tone, so
Mm.
when you create a certain sound in certain sequences and you lie in the chamber in the Pyramid of Giza, you leave your body. It's not necessarily that you leave your body, but you resonate the pyramid in such a way that your consciousness becomes still within space, and that is actually connected to the stars that the pyramid is aligned with. Crazy, it's amazing, isn't it? I believe that ley lines are always there, and when we know where they are, we use them to create these structures that we can then use as portals for
Consciousness shifting.
conscious shifting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I believe. And I have sang and made sounds in these spaces, and I have had like incredibly profound experiences, and I know other people have as well. And yeah, the water and the crystals come back to it because I'm sure if we really did the geography and looked at it, there would be like giant aquifers surrounded by quartz under these spaces.
Wow. That's
That's my
amazing.
intuition.
That's amazing
Yeah.
because I think part of our work that we had before the previous guest, which was also looking at that back in our land of Punjab, because Punj means five, Ab means rivers, five rivers. So
Wow, I didn't know that.
it's literally like that's also where the Vedas was written. That's where the Sikh gurus were. That's where all the invasions were happening. That's where partition happened. So there's a lot
Mm.
of stuff happening. And now the water's getting drained out of that to other states. So we're also trying to understand what is it spiritually, because that's quite powerful to have five rivers. What is it spiritually, and could that be connected to ley lines as well? So my head is going now in that direction, but yeah, super super interesting, and yeah, I definitely experience that every time I go to Loch Lomond or Iona as well, because I know Scotland has um like 5 points, and actually the geometry is the same geometry between the points as the pyramids of Giza, which is sacred geometry as well in Scotland.
Mm.
So, and I think it leads to the Palladian star system as well, which is very interesting.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so much I could ask you, but I want to be respectful of your time. Just as we begin to wrap up, um, coming from this decolonization work, I know that we touched on it, but what do you see as the most, or if people even haven't heard of decolonization before? I first heard of it last year, to be honest. So
Mm.
it's quite new to me. And a lot of our community, actually, immigrant communities who come over, they do stick to their wisdom traditions, but I also think it's important to connect to the land and everything that comes with the land and waters here. So, what is that decolonization work? Kind of how do people start to unravel these layers, and how can the communities, whether they are immigrant communities or communities who are native to the land, can start to connect to the ancestral wisdom here?
Mm. Yeah, so I understand like decolonization through my Welsh lens. I first heard of the term, I believe it was through Indigenous Americans who were protesting for their rights
Mm,
and also discussing what it means to be Indigenous. And then how can people who are wanting to, like in America now, connect spiritually to the land? How can they do that without cultural appropriation? So that was my sort of introduction into it, which led me to, because I'm not from there, to be like, oh, okay, so I don't need to sort of step around cultural appropriation based on my land because I'm from here.
mhm,
So I started looking at the history of where I'm from, and looking at my own personal ancestry. But as you said, there are people all around the world for different reasons who weren't born in the place that their family are from, you know. You, for example, you know, you've got some of your family aren't from Scotland. So to start off with, I'd say like if you're interested in connecting to the natural world, that is like the best place to start because if we look at like what colonialism really is, colonialism in like the way that I see it is going to somewhere that you're not from and taking and disrespecting that which was there and trying to impose your own way of living upon a people who or a place that is harmoniously living the way that they're living. And that is sort of where the world has come to. And just by like for me, I just take it back to just by simply like forget about our ancestry, forget about our blood, like just connect to the natural world around you. If you're in a city, there's parks, there's trees, like there are no constraints around decolonization. There's no certain way to do it. It's not like it's you need to have a research mentality to do it. You don't need a certain level of intelligence to learn about history to do it. I'm just interested in these things. Decolonization is really just about coming back to who we are as a human being within our natural environment, within our surrounding ecology. And how is it that we can live and move through our natural landscape by doing as little harm to it as possible? And then looking a bit broader than that, how can we do as little harm to the wider environment as possible? How can we care for our local communities? And, you know, some people say that a real important part of decolonization is like studying and learning the past or who you are. But I think that like not a lot of people don't have time for that realistically, do they? Like a lot of like, you know, you've got like parents of like 5 kids who are also looking after their grandparents, you know. Yeah, decolonization is really just like returning to understanding like where you are in your natural environment, and how to care for it and be compassionate about it as much as possible and be compassionate for the people in it and the people across the world and then the world as a whole. And then if you do have the time and you want to dive deeper into it and you do know who your personal ancestors are, I'd say look towards how they have participated in colonization and then how they perhaps have suffered due to colonization. So for me, I'm Welsh. I've got one side of my family is English, but I don't know exactly where they come from. I've got a mixture. So I'm looking at how have my people oppressed other people? And then also how have my people been oppressed by other people? And how does that inform who I am as a person? Yeah, like does that
Yeah,
make
that's
sense?
super
Yeah,
powerful
yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah, because I was thinking about this actually before the podcast because I was listening to a very good conversation you had, which was around like even ancestry. We can carry that in our nervous system, the chakra system as well. For example, the sacral, the solar plexus, having these emotions like shame or guilt. Perhaps
Mm,
if um you were seen by society to have oppressive ancestors, or at the same time, if you were holding an oppressive regime, you would maybe have suppressed anger or blame or inferiority complex, something like this. So I feel like it's multi-layered and multifaceted,
mm,
and it might just be like we're the people to be aware of what our ancestors their whatever they've carried unconsciously, behavioral loops, karmic loops, that we can now see what's going on. So yeah, that was super nice to share that. And I think you mentioned, and I think this is an important point maybe to end on, is New Age spirituality versus perhaps what we were talking about in this podcast, what are kind of the few things you've seen in the New Age spirituality? Because I do have compassion and empathy that people are in jobs, in situations that are squeezing them, that they are pressured. They want a release. They want love and light in their life. So I have compassion for that. But what is this kind of trend towards New Age spirituality, and how can people might spot these trends and perhaps develop some healthy and compassionate approach towards then reconnecting to their roots?
I'm going to talk from my experience as being in New Age spirituality, really, because when I was first within the New Age spiritual movement, as I said at the beginning, my awakening was very like explosive and I had no guidance. So, um, yeah, like I felt like quite guilty and shameful when I actually looked at the spiritual world that I was in, um, from a new perspective for the first time, because it was colonial, really. I wanted to leave these lands because I didn't have much of a connection to the natural world here, and I wanted to go to other countries that were cheaper to live in because I have more money than people in those countries, so it's cheaper to live there. Bali, for example, I have compassion, no judgment, but this is just the way it is, Tulum in Mexico. Yeah, and a lot of New Age spirituality for me was colonial in the sense that it was very like capitalist. I was very much into, I felt like I needed to buy things. I was not even that I felt like I needed to buy things. I looked on the internet and in books for guidance for my spiritual practice. And what I was given was this type of crystal. Buy this meditation from this person. Go to this part of the world to learn this. Buy this book to boot. So it was all just like taking from the outside, when really all I wanted was, and all I needed was to love myself and love the natural world around me and care for the people around me. So, what I'd say for anyone who is sort of like wanting to be more aware of the sticky stuff in the New Age world, it is stuff like, what is your what is your purpose? What is your spiritual pursuit? And do the things that the New Age spiritual world, are the things that it's providing you actually going to fulfill that? For example, toxic positivity comes in when you've got New Age gurus saying, avoid anyone in your life who is negative because they're going to bring your vibration down and you can't ascend. That's New Age colonial spirituality. Reality is, you know, the reality of deep for me in service spirituality is witnessing someone who is like what New Age calls low vibe and being like, how can actually I be in service to you? How can I go out into my community now and help people? Some of the most spiritual people in this world are like carers, they're social workers who eat McDonald's every day because if they've only had 2 hours of sleep, not people who are sort of like traveling around the world trying to find themselves. Do
Mm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a powerful point to end on
Yeah.
as well.
It's
Um,
something, yeah, just to end on. I really had this deep realization when my son was born,
mm,
when so he went into the ICU and he needed medical attention when he was born. And it was the first time that I'd witnessed baby nurses who are working all night, every night with newborn babies. And I just had a deep level of compassion for these women. And there's just a side of the world of lovers and healers and just beautiful people who are always working to help society that we can't even see. Um, so yeah, compassion for the unknown is what we all need at this time.
it's amazing. And it's following the thread, I think, from the last podcast of having element of sacrifice, and being able to
Yes.
do that for one another. And of course, the natural world as well. Ah, Stella, thank you so much for sitting down and being so generous with your time and wisdom today. Um, if people really resonated, which I'm sure they did with your work, where can people connect with you? Where can people find you and dive deeper into the work that you're doing?
Mm. Yes, so on all social media platforms, my name is Stella Marie here, like right here. And I also host and facilitate in-person gatherings for people who are all over the world. Actually, I've got a retreat happening 2025 in May, which is in North Wales in Caernarfon. We've got some people flying over from across the seas, so that's not just for people who are in Britain. And I have, yeah, my YouTube channel is where I'm going to start sharing a lot more on there now. Um, but yeah, if I want to promote anything at all at the moment, it's the in-person stuff because I love being online, but I really want to meet people in person and start gathering together and really thinking about like how can we make a shift together?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's what the world needs, just in person, collective consciousness. So I'll put all the links in the description below if anybody wants to check that out. Cool. Thank you again for
Mm.
coming on, Stella. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, Awen.
Awen. And thank you everybody for watching as well.